here at the Wilson Center. Thanks for coming. Brief word about the Wilson Center for those of you that don't know. We're a nonpartisan forum for debate, research, discussion on issues of policy import, targeting our audience of the Washington policy community, the administration, Capitol Hill. Well, as most of you in this room know, I assume all of you in this room know, back in mid-August, anti-government protesters descended on Islamabad, demanding the resignation of the Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. I think it's about 6 weeks later. They're still there, theoretically. There have been negotiations on and off with the government. There's been a lot of speculation about what's going on, what possible role the military could have had, all types of questions. It's something that really deserves some more deeper discussion. And so we're very fortunate this morning to have with us Anjum Altaf, who is going to be bringing a very interesting point of view, looking at these protests, describing them as the latest long march that Pakistan has experienced. It's a country that has a history of such types of events. And Anjum will be talking about what may be behind these protests, whether they've been successful or not, and he'll also be applying some historical context and also looking at some other, perhaps similar cases in other countries outside of Pakistan. So you've got his bio in front of you. Dr. Anjum Altaf is the Dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at LUMS, which is certainly one of the most prestigious universities in Pakistan and perhaps across Asia as well. He'll soon be relocating, though, to Habib University in Karachi, where he'll be provost. He'll be starting there next month. He has been affiliated with the University of Karachi, with the UNC Chapel Hill, and also at the World Bank, where many of you may know him from. And when he was there, he was working on urbanization issues. And he has a doctorate and a master's degree from Stanford University. So we'll let him speak, and then after we hear, he'll probably speak for 30, 35 minutes or so, and then we should have plenty of time for discussion with all of you.
Okay. Thanks, Michael, and thanks to all of you for being here. I have been traveling around the country for a while, and as Michael noted, this long march has now been ongoing for more than a month. So there have been many, many narratives that I've heard, and I could add my narrative to that, but that'll just be one among many. So I prefer to do something different, and to try and examine the aspects of the Pakistani system that are thrown up in relief by an agitation of this kind. And I think that might help us understand better what is going on at this time. Let me just start with a question. There was a march on Washington in 1963, and we asked ourselves, do we celebrate it or do we condemn it today? Right? Then 2004, there was the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. And even in Pakistan, there was in 2009, there was a lawyers' march. So I really don't know 10 years from now how we will look back upon this present event. It's hard to say. I'm sure it'll have some positives and some negatives. But the one thing that it does bring up is that these kinds of actions have a fairly long history. And they come about when a democratic system, for one reason or another, becomes unresponsive to some of its stakeholders, either the citizens or other political parties. And then people have to resort to what are termed extra-constitutional measures, just some like agitations. So I mean, this is nothing new in the history of Pakistan or in the history of other countries. These kinds of events are fairly common, fairly regular. What is interesting is to look at the specificity of each particular event and to see what is really different about it, what is unique about it, and what is of particular interest. And in that sense, I think one of the comparators that might be useful is the Arab Spring and Tahrir Square, simply because the actors in this event in Pakistan keep bringing it up again and again. They refer to it as this is the equivalent of the Arab Spring, of Tahrir Square. Now, if you recall, to my mind, they're completely different. If you recall, Tahrir Square or the Arab Spring was a protest that brought together a whole spectrum of people, young, old, ideologically very different, from the Muslims to the liberals, the different religions, the gender mixed, everything. It was inchoate. It was leaderless for a long time. If you contrast this with what happened in Islamabad, it starts from the top down. It has two leaders who ask their supporters to follow them to Islamabad to engineer a revolution. Right? It's a completely different phenomenon. And so the question that comes to the mind of a social scientist is, well, what accounts for this difference? Why is it, the nature of this protest so top-down, so in some sense insurrectionary? And there I have a hypothesis that I will toss out, and I would like you to come back to me and discuss it during the question and answer session, whether you subscribe to it, you buy it, you find it plausible or not. Now, the way I see South Asia is that South Asia today is probably the most dynastic region in the entire world. Okay. It's not one country. If it were just one country, we would say this is random. Okay, so it's like something peculiar going on. But it's every country in South Asia, and you can start with India, that has supposedly uninterrupted democracy from 1947 onwards. You had 16 years of Jawaharlal Nehru, then his daughter took over. She was grooming her younger son to take over. He died. So the elder son, who was an airline pilot, very reluctant, was pulled in. Then he died. His Italian wife took over, and after her son, and then when the son stumbled, then the daughter, right? So, I mean, you can't get more dynastic than that, right? And the similar in Pakistan, you have, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and then Benazir Bhutto, and then Benazir Bhutto's husband, and now the son has declared that, I'm going to be 26 next year, and I'm going to stand from my family seat. Note the words, family seat, okay? That tells you something. And and so, take Bangladesh, take Sri Lanka, take Nepal, Bhutan. So the whole, there is something very structural that makes this region like that. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But note that this is not only at the national level. If you go down to the sub-national level, it's exactly the same. And the more interesting part is that it's not just confined to the rulers. This is something that is accepted by the subjects as well. Otherwise somebody would say, well, what credibility does Bilawal Bhutto have to become the leader of the, one of the major parties? They would just say, well, this is not acceptable. But it is acceptable. It is at the demand of the population that a party seeks to bring in the next person in the Nehru line, right? Because it's the most acceptable. It's very common if an incumbent representative dies in office that the electorate prefers the seat to be offered to the next of kin, to either the wife or the brother or the son or something. So that's the way it is. Now, one of the reasons it's like that is that it is also South Asia, one of the regions where it's an extremely unequal and hierarchical society, where the majority of the population is dependent on a few for human rights, for jobs, for justice, for everything, right? So it's a patron-client society. And we have seen again and again these episodes where somebody has come along and said, this is a sham democracy, now we are going to restart again. And in a few years, it goes back exactly to where it was, which tells us that there are some underlying dynamics, some forces that tend to move it back to a form that is compatible with the underlying social reality of that place. So it is Pakistan still, less than 50% or more than half rural, and even the urban constituencies are delimited in such a way that they are fragmented. They're broken up. You are familiar with how constituencies can be delimited to get, various results. So you can have a city of 1 million, but the constituencies would be drawn in such a way that it's broken up into 5 that are dominated by the rural vote. And that is also one of the reasons, I think, why Pakistan has not had a census since 1998, because the urban vote is different from the rural vote. There is no doubt about it. Okay. So, and that we are seeing a little bit of it with Imran Khan. And you saw it with the Aam Aadmi Party in India as well. The urban vote is different. So, if you are subscribing to what I'm saying, that this, in many ways, it is a society, it's a system that is oriented towards a monarchy, then the elections, in today's world, you can't get away from the fact that the legitimacy is conferred on a representative system. So even North Korea has to call itself, Democratic Republic of North Korea. You have to have that. So the elections are just a means of ascending to the rulership, to the kingship. Once you ascend to it, then you are a monarch. Then you are non-responsive, you are unaccountable, you can appoint anybody you like, and which we have seen again and again in Pakistan, right? So, and also historically, I don't think that we are very unfamiliar with elective monarchies. We have seen them in the past. So that's the scenario that I'm laying out, right? Now, in that sense, you see that the challenge now in a monarchical system, you have these insurrectionary challenges. A pretender to the crown, somebody who wants to be a king, will lead a movement and say, well, I'm going to replace you and become the king myself, with no change to the system whatsoever. Absolutely none. Only replace one king with another. Right? And that's, if you listen to the rhetoric of Imran Khan, he's continuously calling Nawaz Sharif a king. That you are behaving like a king. He's not behaving like a king, he is a king. That's my point. Right? As soon as Imran Khan or anybody, if he manages to replace him and becomes the ruler and tries to implement the change that he's promising through the parliamentary system, he'll find out that he can't do it. Okay. We take the example of India. You had a similar movement. In India, the movements are different because of the culture. So you have these fast and to death. Anna Hazare, okay, now coming. There's too much corruption and I'm going to bring a change and I'm going to fast to death. So he got his Lokpal, which the democratic system had not been delivering for years and years through the constitutional means. And he spun off this political party, the Kejriwal, Aam Aadmi Party. As soon as they went into government, within weeks they were out, right? Because they couldn't deliver. Similarly, Imran Khan, with the province at his disposal, can deliver. He can't deliver within that system, right? So that's one part of it. Now, there is one big difference between India and Pakistan. I mean, if you buy this fact, for the moment, let's buy it that both are monarchies, okay, in the guise of democratic governance. There's one big difference. In Pakistan, there is an unrepresented player in the game that wields a lot of power. It's different from India. And like any player in a game, that player wants to maximize its own interests and its own power. Okay? So the difference, the way I would characterize it, the difference between India and Pakistan is that India is a system with kings, and Pakistan is a system with kingmakers. Okay? And that's a huge, huge difference. To understand it, I would offer you the analogy of the Mughal dynasty. Okay? Started in India in 1526, was in place for about 300 years till 1857. The first 150 years was the rule of kings. You ask anybody in India and Pakistan to tell you who were the 6 great emperors in that first half, and they will, check them off saying Babur, Humayun, Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, Aurangzeb. That's it. The next 150 years was the rule of the kingmakers. There were maybe 24 kings. If you ask people the name, they won't know a single one. Some of them ruled for 2 months, 3 weeks. Not a single name. Why? Because those kings were just the fronts. The behind the scenes, they were the kingmakers. Right? So, if Pakistan at the moment is in that kind of a mold where you have a very powerful player who's moving or at least influencing what is happening in the scenario that is visible to us. So, I suppose given that, one can ask, well, in this present crisis, in this present scenario, what might be the interest of the kingmaker? Right? And how is the kingmaker interacting with these insurrectionary pretenders to the throne? Right? Has it set them up? Is it just banking on them? Is it just using them? That's for us to sift through the evidence and come to some conclusion. This couple of weeks back, I was sitting with a fairly senior diplomat who went on for about half an hour arguing vociferously that this time the kingmakers were not involved. And at the end of it, I said, okay, I'm going to pose you a litmus test. Okay, you tell me, reading the things that are coming out of Islamabad, is the king telling the kingmakers what to do, or is the kingmaker telling the king what to do? And he said, without changing expression, yes, it's the kingmaker telling the king what to do. You have to do this, you have to negotiate, you can't use the police, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the evidence is fairly clear. The evidence is fairly clear, I think. So, given that, I think while what exactly is happening, I don't know. Only the people who are involved, they know. Whatever is happening, I think the outcome is quite clear. And the outcome is that the king has been weakened. The king has been put on notice. The king has to cede the space on which he was encroaching and retreat. And I think that that outcome, from the perspective of the kingmaker, can be considered quite satisfactory. I think the ends have been achieved. The details of it would work out, whether the situation has stumbled into one where there is really a standoff, where there is no good exit strategy for anyone. That we'll see. I mean, it's always the case that nobody can predict every eventuality. Right? So some things can go contrary to what one had expected. And I think that it is now in a state where nobody really has a good exit strategy, and no player really has enough power over the other. Each one has lost credibility to be able to force a conclusion. So this might drift on for a while, but I think that the end objective has been achieved. Okay, so I'll stop there for questions then.
Well, thank you. I actually thought that you made the hypothesis that you brought forward was quite compelling, and I think that certainly there's some truth to it. Let me ask you a question about the timing for this. Why do you think that we're seeing this? Why did this movement occur when it did? Why did it happen in mid-August? Do you think it was a sense of that there was an opportunity, a window of opportunity to act, given that there was these ongoing tensions between, to use your terms, the king and the kingmakers were growing, and maybe there was, the idea was there was an opportunity to try to exploit those tensions and to bring about some change. There's been all kinds of speculation. Some have argued that this was an effort to distract attention from what's going on in North Waziristan with the military offensive there. So if you could just say a few words about why you think this has happened when it has. And I was going to ask you, why does it continue to drag out, even though the objectives seem to have been achieved? But I think you've done a pretty good job of suggesting that there's somewhat of the exit strategy just is not clear, and things could draw out until the various players decide how to wrap things up. But in terms of the timing, why it began when it did, when it occurred, why it occurred when it did.
It's very hard to pin it down to an exact date, but my sense is that, whenever there's a perception that some lines are being crossed, at that time there is some kind of a triggering action that would either arrest it or slow it down. And just going back by the history, every time there is an intent to ease tensions with India, there is a reaction. There is a whole history of that going back many years. I mean, Kargil was a very striking example of that. So anytime there is, an attempt by a civilian government to take control of either foreign policy or defense policy, you would expect some kind of a reaction. So, this overture to India happened at, little before that. And of course, there are other tensions, as you said. There is differences on the policy in Fatah. There is the trial of Musharraf and, those things. So a lot of things probably coming together at one point.
Okay, and one more question, then I'll open it up to the group. If you could say a few words about what you think this means for democracy in Pakistan. There's been a lot of discussion about how democracy has been weakened because effectively the civilian government has been cut down to size, which is a term we're hearing a lot about. But on the other hand, to my regard, one could perhaps make an argument that in some ways, perhaps democracy has been strengthened. We saw what happened in Parliament with most of the parties rallying in support of Nawaz Sharif. And of course, the government is still in power. It didn't resign, and it's not going to resign, or we don't think it's going to resign anytime soon. So what do you think this means for democratization in Pakistan, which has been arguably progressing slowly but steadily since 2008. So just if you wanted to comment on that.
It's ironic that the democratic process, what we call its working, has to be coerced or pushed in this manner from the outside. So ever since the government has been elected, I think the Prime Minister has hardly ever been inside Parliament. Right? And only when you have this kind of a siege do you see the Prime Minister coming and some kind of serious debate taking place about processes and procedures and, the meaning of democracy. So it's being pushed into a kind of a democratic ethos. The natural tendency of it is to revert back to what I had mentioned before. If you take it away, it'll go back to to this autocratic. I mean, people remember that the last time Nawaz Sharif was elected with the majority, he wanted himself to be nominated as the Amirul Momineen or something, right? I mean, it tells you something. So it'll be forced into democracy, I think.
Okay, let's open things up to the group. If you could wait for the for a microphone to arrive, and then if you could give your name and affiliation, and then please pose one question. Keep it relatively brief so that we can get to a number of you. So we'll start right up here at the front.
Yeah, Nusrat Ahmed from IFPRI. Hi, Anjum.
Hi, Nusrat.
It's been a long time since
Yes.
we met. Good to see you. Just a quick question is, do you see this movement as any different from the past? And do you think any outcome that may be different from the past? Because, this Michael's question about democracy, I don't agree that there is democracy in Pakistan. It's a democracy without accountability is no democracy. So do you see this as any different from the past? That is the question.
Nusrat, yes, I mean, there have been different kinds of movements in Pakistan. And I think that the fact that Pakistan has 3 or 4 very different kinds of education systems, graduating people with very different imaginations of what good governance is about, leads to a whole mix of types of movements. For instance, the movement against Ayub Khan, if you go back all the way, was very much like the Arab Spring and Tahrir Square, right? The lawyers' movement was also, in a sense, different. But the country has been becoming conservative over time. And the imagination has started to favor a particular kind of perception of good governance. And we are seeing the results in the type of movements we see. But, I mean, just going back to Ayub Khan was a completely different movement, completely different.
Good morning. My name is Arnold Zeitlin, and I've been following Pakistani affairs since I opened the first Associated Press Bureau in Rawalpindi in 1969. Sometime during that time, I had a conversation in Peshawar with a group of Pathan leaders, and I remarked rather lightheartedly, and this is a follow-up to your question, that for 1 crore rupees, one could start a revolution easily in Pakistan. And Wali Khan, who was with us at the time, said, I can do it for 10,000. Isn't this what has happened since then, not only with the present situation, but with past situations that we just discussed? An extension of that vulnerability in Pakistan to use money to create a crowd to press a point.
I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't say that you can just simply use money to engineer a revolution. I mean, there has to be some alignment somewhere that would support, a change of that sort. But, I mentioned the example of Anna Hazare, it's an attempt to create a change by using as kind of a demonstration, whatever you want to call it, right? So, I mean, that's a part of the way things have happened in that. So it's not surprising, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that you can just buy a complete revolution.
My name is Shahid Javed Barki.
Gigi
I'm
Shahid.
associated with Woodrow Wilson. I just wonder whether there has been any demographic and economic analysis of what's behind these two movements, Imran Khan's and Tahir al-Qadri's. I've been looking at some of the numbers, and I have come to following tentative conclusions. One is the size of the middle class has increased enormously in Pakistan. I estimate that there are something like 120 million people who can be classified as belonging to the middle class. Now you can divide this into two groups. There is the so-called Burger Brigade, which is the one that Imran Khan has been attracting. These are from the upper and the middle class. And then you have the lower middle class. These are new graduates from the ranks of the poor into the middle class. A lot of these people have graduated because of the remittances they have received from the Middle East and so on. So if you look at the electoral data, assuming that it was not enormously rigged as Imran is claiming, then you see numbers such as the following, that there was an increase of about 9 million people in the number who voted. And it's exactly the number that Imran Khan attracted from zero because he didn't participate in the previous election. I'm not suggesting that 100% of that went to Imran. My question is, my speculation is that this is a restless group with no strong party affiliation. And they migrated to Imran and to PMLN because of variety of reasons, some economic and some to do with poor governance by PPP. So these people are now looking for, if you use the analysis of Albert Hirschman, exit loyalty and
Voice.
voice, Imran is exercising the voice option. Qadri is exercising the exit operation. But these people need some kind of accommodation within the system. And they are not finding it, and hence they are persevering with this effort. Just a lot of speculative stuff that I'm throwing at you, but I wonder if you have any reaction to this.
Sure. I mentioned, I think, before you came in, that the urban vote is very different from the rural vote. And as the country is urbanizing, we are seeing more and more of the urban vote coming into play. And Imran Khan represents, as I mentioned also, like Kejriwal and the Aam Aadmi Party, you see that phenomenon of the urban vote wanting to break away from the old mold of doing things. So clearly, yes, it is. It's that part of the electorate, the younger one, the urban vote, the people who have some education and are not finding jobs, clearly, and therefore I think, to me, the only positive dynamic here is the one that is not visible, and that is the one that comes with urbanization. I suppose one can look ahead and look at the example of Latin America, where countries with 90% or close to 90% urbanization, you can elect a Lula or a Chavez or a Morales or people, who are not part of the old dynasties and the old groups. So And I mentioned, and maybe you will have something to say on this when you are not here, that to my mind, that might be the one reason why Pakistan has not had a census since 1998, because there would be a shift in the number of seats that would be urban. Right, so.
Hi, Mehreen Farouk from WORD, the World Organization for Resource Development and Education. I was in Pakistan for 2 weeks during the protests, and primarily in Islamabad, so it was very interesting to see the dynamics there firsthand. You raised the question about the implications for democracy, and one of the questions that we saw constantly being discussed was whether this was setting a bad precedent, in which anytime people had a grievance, that they would just hold the government siege. And the thing that was disturbing for me was this rising sense of justification for vigilante justice. I mean, we saw this when, with folks just taking the law into their own hands with total disregard for the rules for holding a protest in Islamabad. I saw upper-class women refusing to pay sales tax on a cup of coffee. So the examples just went on. And the rhetoric just seemed to be centered on go, Nawaz, go, without any real points for an agenda or any points for real change. So my question in all this is I know we're all quite familiar with a lot of development programs and good governance, civic education programs, which are targeted to youth or to folks in rural areas, trying to bring them into the political structures, teaching them about how to reach out to their local authorities to implement real change. But I was wondering, are these efforts also taking place in major cities, and particularly with college youth?
Okay. As far as the bad precedent is concerned, I just stated at the outset that we will not know till 10 years later as to what were the positives and what were the negatives of this. We might look upon it very differently. As the kind of examples that I gave you, and I asked very pointedly, do we condemn them today or do we celebrate them? So I mean, when you have something like this, there will be, the kinds of incidents that you are mentioning, and there'll be the kind of positives where people have been forced into the assembly to at least talk about electoral reforms, where there was no talk of, there was complete dismissal. We don't care. You're not happy with the results, that's fine. Right? So that's something that we should leave for a few years. As far as the efforts that you are mentioning, I don't think that there is any particular difference between efforts in the rural areas and efforts in the urban areas. It's the same kind of an effort. I don't really believe that they are very effective or, they are delivering what they're intended to do. But it's the same kind of thing is happening in the urban areas. Yeah.
David Orden from IFPRI. First of all, on your comment about your question about the 1963 march, last year there was a 50th anniversary of the 1963 march.
Yes.
And it brought what would now be considered a medium-sized crowd to the mall, maybe a couple 100,000, or maybe 50,000, 100,000. It didn't fill the mall like the 63 march did, but 3 presidents spoke, and we have an African-American president now. So there's one sense of what does the world look like in the United States 50 years after the march. On the other hand, you have things like this Ferguson situation, which just for my generation, not so young generation, it just sounds so much like the 1960s. Still unarmed black kids getting shot 6 times by the police, and not just once. So things evolve very slowly in a society, and even in this developed and complex and sophisticated society, you have these 2 divergent results of the 1963 march.
Yes.
What I'd like to ask you to do is to comment on a naive narrative that I tell to my friends in the United States about my work in Pakistan. So when the election occurred, I said, well, Pakistan's got lots of problems, but it sort of looked like an election. The establishment, maybe corrupt party that was in power got voted out. The establishment, maybe corrupt party that was out of power got voted in. And some new guy made a splash, like a John Anderson or somebody, or, you know, got some votes, even won one province. I mean, what more can you ask for a democratic transition? That's the way we expect things to work. Now, you're telling a darker story,
Yes.
and I appreciate that darker story. That's why I want you to relieve me of some of my naivete. But, you know, there's darker stories, again, even in a developed country like the United States. We don't all have the same power over our political system. Let's not kid ourselves. So there's that darker story I appreciate. There's the naive story I tell, so you can maybe help me say, what should I now say to my American friends who want to understand Pakistan? But then the last part is, it seems to me it matters a lot. Going back to the '63 march, it matters a lot how this current protest movement ends.
Yes.
Because a protest movement of 50,000 people should not topple even a corrupt democratically elected government. That should have to wait for the next election, for Khan to run again or whatever.
Sure.
So it really does seem to me, in my naive sense, that it matters a lot how this ends as to whether democracy is sort of held up, corrupt democracy, whatever you want to call it, kingmaker-driven democracy, whatever your darker story tells it. Still, it matters a lot what happens now in terms of the narrative we'll tell about whether democracy was taking hold or not taking hold. So I'd appreciate if you'd comment on that.
Sure, sure. You know, the first remark on the 1963 march. Look, the 1963 march resulted in some really significant legislation, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights, and that's huge, huge. Right? Any march that can result in that kind of legislation, you know, let's have more of those. Okay. On the story on the slow democratization, I'm not dissing democracy at all. You know, that's the direction to go. And you see, I spoke about India, but look, you know, the vote is the only mechanism, only vehicle for the marginalized to take back some space for themselves. So the election of Mayawati in UP is unprecedented. It would not happen without the marginalized getting the vote. You know, somebody like Modi getting elected. Okay, so yes, I'm all in favor of that slow democratization. My question to you would be, it's a slow process, it'll take a long time. Does Pakistan have that much time? Okay. Given the state that it's in, given the state of its economy, given its population and the size of its, you know, cohort of youth, given that it's not generating enough jobs, given that there is now often 12, 14, 18 hours without electricity. Does Pakistan have that much time where this evolutionary process would lead them to a rooted democracy that would deliver? That I'm not sure of. I can't say.
Yes.
Mark, excuse me, Mark Becker from DOD. Dean Altaf, I hate to sound terribly jingoistic or in comparison to the other questions, terribly kind of unsophisticated, but what are the implications for us, the U.S., vis-a-vis our foreign policy and our military policy?
Okay. To answer that very, very frankly, you know, this, as I was mentioning, I was at a meeting where there were people from DOD as well. And after we had a lot of talk, I said, okay, this is another one of my litmus questions. There are 2 sharifs in Islamabad. Which sharif is more important for you? That's the answer to the question. Okay.
Okay. Yes. Let's question in the back there.
Thank you. My name is Sid Ravishankar. I'm with the Stimson Center. You'd mentioned that there's the Kingmaker method of selecting Pakistan's leaders, and I was wondering, we all know of, the one kingmaker. Are there any other players, and are the protests maybe directed at the wrong people if they really want to affect change, if they're going for Nawaz Sharif as opposed to the kingmakers that you described? Thank you.
No, just one kingmaker.
That simple?
Yes.
All right, let's go to the woman sitting in the back.
Good morning. My name is Brenda Seaver, and I'm with the Wilson Center. And I'm currently researching what I call the dark side of middle-class growth in the developing world. And I know virtually nothing about Pakistan, but I was intrigued by the question from one of my colleagues over there about the political or potential political impact of growing urbanization and also the expansion of the middle class in Pakistan. My question to you is, do you see genuine growth in what you would define as the middle class in Pakistan? Is that something you're seeing just demographically, according to your own definition? There are so many definitions out there for the middle class. And what you're almost suggesting when you talk about this very slow process towards democratization, and you don't even know if they have time to get to that, you're starting to sound like what I'm looking at, which is the potential for dark political effects in the short to intermediate term before you get to that long-term potentially positive outcome. So is there a real middle class in Pakistan as you would define it? And even if there is, are you seeing some of the negative effects of that in social tensions that could give rise to negative political repercussions beyond what you're already seeing in Pakistan? Thank you.
Look, there are no hard numbers, but as Barki Saab has said, there are various estimates. The estimates of a growing middle class, but given that we don't have numbers, let's not spend too much time on Pakistan. But you take the example of India, where there is, having had 15 years of 7-8% growth, there is a big middle class, and it's a growing middle class. But note also that this middle class is much more authoritarian, much more autocratic than the rest of the population. Very keen on India following the China model, this impatient with democracy, let's get on with it, let's decide, let's bomb these Naxalites, right? So I subscribe to what you are saying, that even if the middle class is growing, it does not mean that we are moving towards a more liberal, a more democratic polity, or tendencies towards that effect. It could be exactly what you are saying, support for more autocratic governance.
Yep.
Marvin Weinbaum, Middle East Institute. Couple of thoughts and embedded question. You began with the monarchical character of, particularly you focused on Pakistan and India. Aren't we viewing now the twilight of monarchies in both places? Certainly the BJP would suggest a clear break, but it's more than that. The Congress Party seems to be disintegrating. Decentralized politics seems to be the future in India. And in Pakistan, certainly the Bhuttos are hanging in there. And I don't think, even though Zardari was able to capture the mantle, it doesn't seem likely that Bilal will be able to do so. And as far as Nawaz, certainly that line has been tainted, and although I understand his daughter is anxious to biting the bit, so I think we'll have to take that into consideration. But more importantly, I wanted to look at you suggested that these demonstrations, these popular movements, were a natural phenomenon in the democratic process. So I wanted to ask you whether they're effectively positive or negative, because you've also said that democracy has to gain incrementally. A great many people would argue that not only does it take too much time, but the obstacles really are structural and too deep for this to happen anytime, even in the future. Are these movements a way of jump-starting? Is that where the hope is, that somehow they can jumpstart things? Because as we look back, and you brought up the Ayub, well, that led to Yahya Khan. It didn't lead to a popular, yes, Bhutto came in later, but that really is because of the war and other factors. Berkey Saab mentioned this rising class. Aren't they, as you, I think, rightly point out, that they're not politically oriented necessarily in one way or the other, so that they could easily become the foot soldiers of an Islamic movement, which has a clear vision and clearly has a clear identity, and that would represent a quantum change, certainly. I think perhaps we should be very cautious about where these movements go. As we saw certainly in the Arab Spring that you mentioned here, they end really with, in some ways, equally repressive regimes that they sought to overthrow.
True. Sure. Thanks for those comments. I certainly think that given a long enough time, the monarchical system would wind down, and you are right about India, where the BJP has been elected. I mean, the BJP has been elected before. Let's also keep that in mind, so that if Modi is not able to deliver on what he has promised, right, then we are not sure how the system would transition, whether we would have going back to the dynasty or not. As to whether these movements can jumpstart democracy, I mentioned in my remarks that every time there has been a restarting of the process in Pakistan, it has converged back to a particular form that is compatible with the socio-economic reality. So I don't really think that it can be jump-started in this particular way. And there are reasons for that you're familiar with. We can talk about later. But as for the difference between India and Pakistan, I suppose you can see with BJP, with Modi, the slight tendency towards a more autocratic kind of model of governance. This talk of applying the Gujarat model to all of India. Okay, but you are right about Pakistan, that there is another alternative in Pakistan, and if things don't work, it could very well tend towards a more Islamic kind of, a more caliphate kind of a model of governance. There is sympathy for that. It's increasing conservatism. The kind of school curriculum that is in place encourages that kind of whether it'll actually go there or not, but those powers will become serious contenders in the political game. Yes.
So my name is Muhammad Ali. I'm from Pakistan. Muhammad Ali is my name. Lost his mind that I couldn't hear to your first part of your lecture. I was late. I would like to suggest add on that viewing the Pakistan history since 47, if you see the first 10 years, 9 prime ministers changed. This shows the immaturity. India was in advantage. They had a better democratic system for long. Ayub, the president Ayub, made a commander-in-chief and a defense minister for 10 years with 9 prime ministers. Ultimately, he took over. And all those political leadership begged him, which I personally feel he shouldn't have taken over. Then the process started for 10 years. Then Yahya came, then Zia came, and then Musharraf came and host of others, political leadership. My concern is that seeing the environments, population is a very serious cancer, let me tell you. The cancer what is going to really make Pakistan in problem is the population. Rule of law is terribly bad, totally compromised. Corruption is at the highest level. Restlessness, what Mr. David said, that even over here also things are bad. But it takes time. And you also very rightly said that time, how much time we have. Can we go with that? The Chief Justice, you know how the environments were. Compromising his own son in the court. Then Musharraf's case going on. With all hostile environments and a lot of problems, energy crisis over there, youth, 3 million jobs from where they're going to come up. Government can't give it. So there is a need to bring the corporate people to come forward. Wherever I go or I meet people, I think nobody's ready to come forward over there for two reasons: corruption and economy, energy. My request to you is, sir, that with these environments, I don't expect both the political parties, I have a lot of respect for them, that they can be able to find some middle way out. If Imran is there, let me tell you, Imran may have limited numbers with him, but people like me and host of others, they are with him because we want change. A change for good, a change for the accountability, a change for the rule of law, a change for justice. These are missing very badly over the period of time. And what changes have come up, we talked of Islamic State, the gentleman said, I fear that it's not in the interest, yes, when there's a justice is denied, then people like Mullah Omar, what he did in Afghanistan, it is damage there, but Pakistan can't afford. Pakistan is a very strong country, very aware country, and it has got a lot of wisdom and maturity among the leadership to make sure that in difficult crisis, they take some extremely good decisions. Let me tell you. But there is a need, sir, I personally feel that how to overcome this problem of the crisis going on. And do you think that I'm not for army to come over? Nobody wants. But there is a need to have us an organization, a government, which should come forward, look after these 3-4 parameters I talked about, and then give a democratic, honest, upright the changeover to those who win. Sir. This is my statement.
Yeah, can I answer that? You know, my first comment would be on population, which you said is the most serious problem. And I always, say, well, just look across to India, okay? That has 5 times the population of Pakistan. And look across to China. And if with the 1 billion people, it can have, 10% growth for 20 years, then clearly it's not the population that's holding it back, right? And corruption all over Indonesia, you have the same kind of corruption. India, the magnitude of the scams that have been going on in India compared to that, Pakistan is peanuts, right? So it's not corruption or population. As for, supporting Imran Khan because we want change, I would say, well, what is the guarantee that Imran Khan will deliver you the change? And secondly, this government has been elected by a popular mandate. People had the choice to vote and they voted for a particular government. So what is the basis for saying, well, now let's change it and bring somebody else through an extra constitutional way? I mean, there is absolutely no justification for that. Imran Khan has a province and he should show what he can do in that province. Right. Okay.
You misconstrued this part. I'm not with Imran Khan. I'm talking in general that people need change for good. They want.
But they have the mechanism of the vote, right?
That somebody has to come forward. I am afraid that these two, right, the parliament, the way it is moving forward, I hope they bring a change.
But I mean, that comes back to the same point, whether what we have can really be called democratic governance, since it is not accountable. The elections are only being used to get to the top and then turn into a monarchical system, right? So that's a different issue, right?
Okay, yes.
I'm Hassan from Pakistan Embassy. Thank you, Professor, for your speech. I have 2 questions. The first question is purely academic. There is a tendency to find similarities between this movement with many other popular movements such as Tahrir Square, Arab Spring, 1963 we discussed. But I find more similarities between this movement with the Occupy Wall Street movement of the United States in its context as well as in its outcome and the fate of this movement as well. So I would like to have your comment on that. My second question is regarding the Kingmaker, the reference to Kingmaker which you made. There are lots of conspiracy theories going on in Pakistan and outside Pakistan, and this one of that is the concept of Kingmaker. But in this very particular case, it seems that the Kingmaker is with the democracy, and it is clearly stated and issued a press release even. So which Kingmaker Imran Khan and Tahir al-Qadri is looking at? In fact, they want the, someone to become the Kingmaker and make them the king. So this situation seems, something very, we are talking about two different issues at the same time. The Kingmaker is with the democracy or with those who are now trying to topple the democracy with this support of, how much of the population? 0.01% of Pakistan's population. Thank you.
Okay. As I said, there are a lot of narratives about this particular scenario. And you can find various comparisons to which you can allude and draw some lessons. I mean, I suppose in some ways you can compare it to Occupy Wall Street, although, I mean, this is not really, a movement highlighting a particular economic issue or a particular economic divide. It's very much get rid of this government and we are going to take over. That's very different from Occupy Wall Street. Okay. As to the second point, the Kingmaker, the real question is there a Kingmaker or not, right? If you say, yes, there is a Kingmaker, then you say whether the Kingmaker supports one part or the other clearly depends on that Kingmaker maximizing its own interest. It doesn't have to follow the same strategy every time. The real point here is that there is a player, okay, in the game that is not part of the elected system that wields power in its own interest. How it does so depends on the circumstances.
Yep.
I'm going to ask you probably a very unfair question, sir, but as a cross-border Pashtun who also happens to be an American, I've spent the last 12 years actually in Iraq and Afghanistan, and 8 of those have been spent in the south and the east of Afghanistan with forays into my ancestral northwest frontier, etc. So for people like myself who have relatives in Kandahar, who have relatives in Helmand, who have relatives in Jalalabad and Peshawar and Quetta, I envy those of you who can sit in places like Karachi and Islamabad and Lahore and actually talk about a way forward, whereas in places like Peshawar and Mardan and Quetta and Kandahar, etc., it's literally a survival for the intelligentsia over there. I think one of the biggest problems I've had is that every single time I've crossed the border, I see a total disconnect and I see sort of a hatred when it comes to, on the part of the leaders in Kabul or on the part of not understanding how, people in Afghanistan think in Islamabad. Why isn't a concerted effort being made for the peoples of Afghanistan and Pakistan to actually cooperate on trying to undo the instability that is affecting both countries and eventually the future and the stability of both countries? I told you it was going to be unfair.
Good question. It may go a bit beyond the discussion today. If you're welcome to respond, but
No, all I would say is that that is the part of the tension between the kings and the kingmakers, right? And if you put aside all the rhetoric of national interest, if you believe in a political science framework that every player is maximizing its own local interest, then that maximization of their interest is coming at the expense of relationships with Afghanistan. And I'm not sure that the Afghans have not a particularly happy perspective on what the Pakistanis have been doing. So that's not a surprise.
We're going to go to a question over here. I think we have time for a few more.
Hello, Jim Moody's my name. I'm one of the many Americans that lived in Pakistan and fell in love with Pakistan. It's hard not to when you're there. People are so wonderful. And the government is so non-wonderful. I was there with the Peace Corps years ago. Does the model of India, despite this, feelings about India per se, but does the political model of India, where you have meaningful elections, you have change, et cetera, and on the democratic scale, India is probably pretty far up relative to most of the world that is outside of Europe or the U.S., I would say. Does that model ring a bell in Pakistan? Even though they may not like the Indian government, they don't necessarily hate the Indian people who actually participate in those elections in India that really seem to set a model. Does this influence anyone? Do they say, wait a minute, we don't want to be like India, but except in this way, they're doing quite well?
Okay, as far as the model is concerned, the model is no different. The model is exactly the same, model of theoretically, of electoral democracy. Now, well, the question is, if you talk of the actual, it's not the actual model, it's the actual outcomes of the same model that are very different, right? And so one has to go into why the outcomes are so different. I think that it is nothing really special about India or Indians. It's just an accident of geography and history that India is so fractured, right, that no one group can usurp power. Right? It's fractured linguistically, it's fractured ethnically, it has many more states. Compare that to Pakistan, where you have. I once showed a table of second-tier governments to an audience, and it was shocking to see that a country of the size of Pakistan has 4 provinces, and one of them is bigger than all the 3 other combined. Right? So that triggers a very different kind of dynamic, and it's that dynamic that plays out and results in very different outcomes. You cannot imagine a non-elected player usurping power in India. It's impossible. Right? So,
are there any other questions? Okay, I think this is a very good discussion. I think what I would just close on, looking to the future, is that if you listen to what these protest leaders, Imran Khan and certainly Tahir al-Qadri, who we didn't really get into, but they both were really emphasizing issues that are very much deeply held grievances across Pakistan: corruption, injustice, vote rigging, things like that. If you look at polls, which of course one has to take with a grain of salt, but generally when young people are polled, these are the types of issues that register high on their priority in terms of what they think is wrong with the country. So, we've seen, at least when there were a lot of protesters out there in Islamabad, these young supporters of Imran Khan and Tahir al-Qadri, cheering them on when they're hearing these things said about needing to get rid of corruption and dynastic leaders and so forth. You see them cheering, dancing, etc. But then, knowing that in many ways these young people are being played to an extent, because I think we could agree that these things that they're hoping will end are not going to end anytime soon. And you have to wonder the long-term implications these people, these young protesters, what it could mean in terms of disillusionment and so forth. So I think it's something to keep in mind. And of course, as we've emphasized a lot, Pakistan is a very young country, where 2/3 of the population is under the age of 30. So I would close with that. This has been a very interesting discussion, a very fascinating presentation, and also I'm glad that we had some good time for a lot of questions, which were very good. So if you could all join me in a round of applause for Dr. Anjum Altaf. Thank you very much for coming. We're adjourned.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, all of you.